Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Human Freedom 2021 program from Alessandro Yensi
and Marina Mazzamuto.
The program is promoting human rights by art and theater all over the world.
It is promoting climate justice, international justice, migration, LGBTQ rights, and children's rights.
The program is held and organized by the International Human Rights Art Festival, by the Global Campus of Human Rights, by Avant-Garde Lawyers, and by Raizes Teatro.
During the past months, we've been producing and spreading media contents about climate justice issues.
We've been telling you stories about Gambia, about Cape Verde, about all the islands, little islands, who are risking to disappear due to the rise in the sea level, and about Sicily, Marina di Melilli, and Augusta, and the pollution emergency there.
And tonight we're going to present to you a conference show, a format which is mixing art, theater, and academic contributions.
One more time, Raizes Teatro Crew is leading you in a very interesting journey all over the world, discovering how people are suffering the consequences all over the world about climate change.
And in the meantime, we have the pleasure to have here 4 experts about climate justice.
We'll be listening to Professor Morcaine by the Art Institute at Columbia University,
Professor Robin Belt from the Art Institute of Columbia University,
Professor Guido Giordano from Università di Roma 3,
and Professor Maurizio Carta from University of Palermo.
Is there any relation between climate justice and social justice? Is there any relation between our way of life and what's happening to the planet? Let's discover it all together in a very few minutes.
Enjoy.
Non si vede
più
Nulla.
Solo ieri.
il ghiaccio.
Era lì,
Lì.
Lì. Casa mia era qui.
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 Il ghiaccio si scioglie.
rapidamente.
Senza sosta.
Perché?
Non lo so.
Perché?
Non lo so.
Orsi,
Foche.
balene,
Dove sono?
Solo ieri erano
Qui.
lì.
Qui.
Vedo acqua.
Ovunque.
Acqua.
Ovunque.
E adesso?
al di là della nebbia.
Al di là del gelo.
Al di là del freddo.
C'è ancora vita?
Non lo so.
Sento i rumori della città.
I passi delle persone ammassate.
Il fumo.
I liquidi.
La plastica.
Non è possibile.
Lo è.
Casa mia era qui.
Andare via.
Dove?
Andare dove?
Al di là del freddo.
Al di là del gelo.
Migrare.
Dove?
In città.
Io pesco, io caccio ogni giorno per sfamare la mia famiglia. Con questo coltello qui. La mia famiglia è composta da 8 persone e tra di noi ci salutiamo sfregando il naso sul naso delle altre persone, in segno d'affetto. Ma con l'aumento del freddo è molto fastidioso. Noi cacciamo gli uccelli, le renne, i trichechi, gli orsi polari, le foche. Grazie a loro ci sfamiamo, ci vestiamo e ci riscaldiamo anche. Io vivo qui, la mia casa è laggiù ed è fatta di ghiaccio e serve per riposare dopo lunghe giornate di caccia. La mia tribù si chiama Inuit e sta scomparendo. Ogni anno siamo sempre di meno e a causa dello scioglimento dei ghiacciai molti se ne vanno e altri purtroppo muoiono. La caccia agli orsi e alle foche è stata vietata perché gli esemplari sono sempre di meno, ma non è stata vietata per noi. Noi ne facciamo un uso consapevole, le rispettiamo, le salvaguardiamo, stiamo attenti ai periodi di riproduzione, evitiamo di cacciare gli esemplari più piccoli. Noi non le uccidiamo per alimentare il mercato selvaggio, ma solo per sfamarci. Ogni anno in questo periodo gli orsi e le foche si spostano verso nord, ma è da 6 mesi che non ne vedo più. Hanno cambiato rotta a causa dello scioglimento dei ghiacciai. Il ghiaccio si scioglie velocemente e sta spaccando anche la mia casa. Ogni giorno si formano crepe lunghissime e devi decidere da quale parte stare. Spero che non si crei una crepa tra me e la mia casa. Ogni tanto emerge l'acqua e con forza sta distruggendo tutto. Se continua così, saremo costretti ad andarcene da un'altra parte e cambiare la nostra vita.
Something we couldn't have imagined 2 or 3 decades ago. But we know that the ice, both in the north and the south, is on a diet. We have 3 independent measurements that show us that the ice is getting smaller. We know that the surface is getting lower. We can actually measure that from space in both Antarctica and Greenland. We know the ice is moving faster, and that's why it's getting lower, because it's like getting stretched, like mozzarella cheese when you bite a pizza. And then we can measure how much it weighs with gravity. And it actually weighs less, both in Greenland and in Antarctica, the same places that it's going faster and getting lower. So as scientists, that's so compelling that we have 3 measurements that tell us the same thing. The poles have this habit of warming faster than the rest of the planet. There's this feedback that when you warm something that's white, you sort of change its clothes from white to black, it gets warmer faster. It's called this amplification. So both the air and the oceans surrounding the ice are getting warmer. So in Greenland, it's about half the warmer air that's making it melt on the top, and half the ocean that's nibbling away at the edge and making it slide faster in the ocean. And then in Antarctica, so far, it's mostly been the warming ocean that's made it go faster. And then we have the ice, in the Alps, and the ice in the Himalayas and in Alaska. Those pieces of ice are primarily disappearing because the air is warmer. So it's fundamentally because we as humans have put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and raised the temperature globally. Remember when I first went to Antarctica in the 1980s, you could already see the impact of humans on life in Antarctica, in that then you could see that people were getting burned faster because of the ozone hole, that people really had to be careful about how long they were outside in Antarctica without something on their face. So that shows how global the problem is. Things are getting better with the ozone hole, probably why I have hope about global warming. But what's happening? What you're seeing is in Antarctica, you're actually seeing probably the impact of the life around the edge. That's mostly where wildlife and natural ecosystems are. Not much lives in the middle of Antarctica. It's kind of flat and white, and there's not much to eat. for anyone. Whereas in the Arctic, you see tremendous changes. You see in Alaska, you see places that used to be able to travel by ice and used to see that housing was stable. You're seeing houses fall off cliffs as you get more open water because you have less protection from the ice. You're actually starting to see impact on communities. And we have a project in Greenland right now, which is one of those mind-bending ones where it turns out right next to the ice sheet in Greenland, the sea level is falling because the land is bouncing back. It's kind of like if you sat down on a cushion on a sofa and it would go down. When the ice comes off, the sofa bounces back up or the land bounces back up. Yes. So there you're actually right close to Greenland ice sheet. You're seeing actually the sea level fall because the land is coming up out of the ocean. And you're starting to hear stories of people noticing rocks coming up out of the water, places they could drive their boats they can't drive in anymore. Infrastructure that was supposed to be in the water getting yanked out. So we're part of this big system now. And the remarkable thing is we're now communicating it and actually understanding why these changes are happening. So there's changes in life at both poles. We as humans really like the ocean. We're drawn to water. So most of the human population lives close to the ocean. So it means that most of the impact in terms of number of people are coming from that rising sea level. I mean, and it's rising with the exception of places close to Greenland. It's rising pretty rapidly around the world. As I like to say, I like to think of it in terms of my leg because there are actually places that there have been these tide gauges measuring how the water goes up and down every day with the tides that we're so familiar with. But they've been there since the 1800s. There's one in New York City that's been on the ferry that you hop onto to go see the Statue of Liberty. There's an instrument that's been there since the 1860s. Since my grandmother's been born, the water has gone up there almost to my knee. And so it's happening, and it's happening to people around the globe. So who's being impacted? Everybody. And we're just beginning to be aware that it's going to be the people who live close to the ocean everywhere. And the biggest impacts are going to be on the people who don't have the resources to adapt, to move, to change what they're doing. This is where I'm hopeful, because I'm hopeful that to address these problems, we actually need to recognize our role in the system, right? We used to think we were just people who could walk through the woods and didn't recognize we were part of the woods. Whereas we are, what we do, how we got to the mountains, driving our car, change, or how we plugged in our computers depended on what the chemistry of the atmosphere is. And it is that knowledge that we can share together that will help us figure out how to change our lives, how to live more sustainably, how to be a little more thoughtful about what we do and recognize the impact it has globally. That we might think that what we do as individuals doesn't matter, but it does. See, I used to think of it as just art about climate change was just going to scare the bejesus out of you. And yes, it's scary, but if all we do is push the sort of horror story button, we're never going to get people engaged. We're going to get them to retreat and say, all is lost. What? I might as well not do anything. I might as well not change what I'm doing. But I'm starting to see more of the connection between climate change art and action. And it is that action and reflection and moving forward to a shared future that I'm more hopeful of. I think we're moving past that. I used to do it in my public presentations. I used to call, I'm going to drown you. And I suddenly realized that just showing how I was going to drown Miami, I could drown Miami several different ways, whether I melted Greenland or Antarctica, that wasn't a helpful way to explain the process, that I was losing people because they thought all was lost. Whereas communicating that we have a role in this and we have the capacity to address it, that I think that's where I'm happy to see the science and art community moving together, that we're moving past the fear to the shared solution space. It's very important we have everybody at the table because our science is better when we have a more diverse set of viewpoints at the table. It's kind of like testing our ideas from different ways. When I started, there were very few women in polar science. And I'm very happy to say that there's been incredible change, that we, even at my institution where we used to have no women on the faculty, we now have 50% women, and we have our first female director. And now the next question we have to really address is racial diversity in climate science, which still is very, very poor. So I take from that it's possible to change, but it has to be changed through action, both at grassroots and leadership. And it must include changing the culture, because if you don't have a culture that's welcoming to women or people from diverse backgrounds, they aren't going to stay at the table. They aren't going to participate. They're going to leave the fields. And we need everybody at the table to help address climate change.
For sure, there's the link between what's happening to the pole and the thinning of glaciers and what's happening all over the world with the rise in the sea level.
A few days ago, we presented Rosita and Ramon, a short play with Stefania Plandeburgo, which is talking about rising sea level and which is available on our Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel.
In a very few seconds, we'll be listening to Professor Marcaine, who will talk about El Niño and its impact on people's lives all over the world.
Enjoy.
Climate justice is just one aspect, of the fact that the system is rigged for rich people, rich countries, and so it requires that we fight all the time. Basically, expect to fight. Don't expect anything to be given because it's morally correct. That doesn't seem to happen a lot. And of course, you also, if you fight these things, you have to, the other side's very powerful. You're going to lose a lot, but hopefully when you lose, you get stronger and fight again. Clearly production of fossil fuels is one of the things that's going to be strongly affected by an attempt to, decarbonize. So in this country, in the US, there's been tremendous resistance. We have very powerful fossil fuel companies who are very well connected politically. And they've also been successful in making the arguments that there are all these jobs at stake. Okay. And the truth is there are. Let's say, I work for a local gas company, okay, that supplies natural gas. I've got a good paying job with lots of benefits, and nobody so far, at least in my country, is promising that they're going to take care of me if, when I lose my job because we stop using gas. Okay. The rich people, by and large, are going to be okay. They can find options. If they work for some I don't know, bank, finance company, big corporation, probably they'll be fine. The people who have these jobs, let's say as coal miners, okay. In the US, this has been a big deal, but the total number of coal miners is very small. I mean, if we're just money, you could buy them all out for a, relative pittance, a very small amount of money. But nobody did that. And, when Hillary Clinton was running, she said, yeah, they're going to lose their jobs. She didn't say, we'll take care of them. And, how would you react if you were one of those people? So we need policies that take account of all the people who will lose their jobs. And it's not just the money, it's also your identity. I mean, my identity, a lot of it comes from the work I do. Surprisingly, the difference between an El Nino year, which is a warm year in the Pacific, and a La Nina year, which is the opposite, that difference in the number of conflicts in the world is equivalent to changing people, the annual income in a country from $1,000 a year to $10,000 a year, or really the other way. The El Ninos cause more conflict. But that's a big difference, okay? So it says climate has an impact. This gets you into trouble with social scientists who don't like the idea that there's something other than human agency. Before the conflict broke out in Syria, the civil war, there were very severe droughts, particularly in the northeastern part of the country. And what happens when you have those droughts is that these farming villages, first of all, you can't feed your family. And the other thing that happens, and this would be true too for the migrations, is that the whole village structure that you've lived with or has been there for generations collapses. All the neighbors you used to talk with and rely on when you needed help and so on and so forth migrate away. In El Nino years, there tend to be droughts in India. Tends to be a poor monsoon. And it still, in this day and age where you think of India as having this layer of relatively middle-class people, but it has a huge number of poor people, of course. And the impact on the gross domestic product, GDP, is still a few percent. It's quite noticeable. In an El Nino year. So in fisheries, particularly in, let's say, the heart of there's the anchovita fishery in Peru, and that gets impacted very strongly. But one of the interesting things there is people have built their homes out of mud, because it doesn't rain, except in an El Nino year. So one of the things they worry about is having their house dissolve, and there, in some places in the coast, there are floods. There's evidence of, older civilizations that disappeared after major flood events. Like there was one around 1100. And anyway, this is another thing which people dispute a lot. But if you go back in history, there seem to be impacts of El Nino showing that it's not just agriculture sometimes, but you got these flood events in places that simply wiped out the infrastructure such as it was. And, that was, in some cases, maybe that contributed a lot to ending the civilization. Probably the primary event was some sort of war with their neighbors, but the civilization was weakened by this. So anyway, I hope that's a kind of answer that you make. Climate change comes along in a place that's vulnerable, and it just pushes things over the edge, multiplies the threat that was already there, and then you have a problem. You go to Syria, okay, there were also government policies that were very, damaging to agriculture. There had been, the previous Hafez had wanted to make the country independent, and they pumped out too much groundwater. So then, then you come on to a period of drought, and you're in, more serious trouble. So I think one thing that the arts can do, better is, let's say, focus a little more than maybe people have on trying to present stories of fighting for justice where it's succeeded. And environmental justice, of course, is now one of the major issues. It's something we've come to recognize in a way that feels to me relatively recent. That it isn't. Again, I mean, I started with this Anatole France quote. Justice is justice in one sense, and the system is what it is. But environmental justice is an issue, a critical issue now, and sometimes it's best to focus on the things where there's change, where change is happening, because there's more chance of moving the system there, than when things are more entrenched. So a lot of these environmental issues and what we're going to do about climate change and so on are areas where things are moving. So that's the place, I think, a good place for the arts and for everyone to jump in. But what I'd like to see is, some inspiring stories of wins, of, things that were done well. And of course, it being the arts, you've got to, it's got to go beyond rational argument. I mean, I can do I'm not an artist, but I could do the rational, we're scientists, we're big on rational argument, but it's the emotional, the visceral, the stuff that gets you in your gut.
File di persone sotto la neve.
Al freddo.
Al gelo.
Tremano.
Sono a piedi nudi.
Si spostano.
Dove?
Vanno verso.
Dove?
Si spostano.
Abbandonano le proprie città.
Non sanno dove andare.
Freddo.
Gelo.
Sono a piedi nudi.
Filo spinato.
Uomini vestiti di nero.
Con cappelli.
Scarponi.
Li fermano.
Chiedono i documenti.
I documenti.
Andate dove?
Dove andate?
Migrate dove? Dove migrate?
Immobili aspettano.
Il proprio turno. Non c'è più cibo qui.
La terra si ribella.
La terra si ribella.
A noi non c'è più cibo.
Da noi.
Nelle nostre terre.
Non c'è più
Cibo. Ormai.
I raccolti vanno a male.
Fa troppo freddo. Prima l'inverno era caldo.
Adesso è freddo.
Gelido.
Le piante non resistono. Dove andate?
Via!
Verso dove?
Verso nord.
Da sud a nord.
Perché? A cercare calore e cibo.
Calore a nord.
Signore!
Dica.
Mi gelano i piedi.
Mi gelano le labbra.
Mio figlio ha fame.
Mia figlia ha freddo.
Mia figlia dorme.
Mio padre non risponde più.
Mio padre sta male.
Stiamo male.
Fila, prego! Mi vedi, sono qui. Sono qui. Sei. Ehi,
Faccio passare, per favore.
permesso.
Per favore.
Permesso.
Permesso. Sono qui.
Dove sei?
Sono qui. Posso andare?
Sono qui. Ti ho perso.
Questo è mio figlio. Permesso.
Non mi riconosci?
Scusi, aiuto. Eccomi. Ehi, faccio passare.
Guarda, mi vedete? Eccoti.
Mi vedete?
Sono qui.
Sto arrivando, per favore.
Fame, vieni, coraggio. Vieni qua, seguimi. Vieni con me.
Eccomi.
Aiuto. Prendimi la mano.
Andiamo. Veloce,
Prendi. Tranquilla, non ti preoccupare. Mia figlia fa bene, eccomi qui. Mi vedi? Vieni con me, aiuto. Sto arrivando. Aiuto. Ho freddo. Permesso. Sono qui. Prendi le cose. Prendi tutto. Sto male. Vieni qui. Aiuto. Dove sono? Aiuto.
Nel campo profughi siamo tutti ammassati, un gregge di esseri umani. Quando va bene si mangia una volta al giorno, come i cani, in fila da 2 ore, per una scatoletta di carne e un panino. Siamo senza casa, lontani dalle nostre famiglie, uomini, donne, bambini, senza campi da coltivare, senza terra, senza acqua. L'unica fonte che c'è qui intorno non dà acqua potabile, ma noi la beviamo lo stesso, perché non abbiamo alternativa. Volevamo spostarci nelle vostre città per contenderci un pezzo di pane, un unico pezzo di pane. Ed è stata guerra civile. Abbiamo fatto la fine dei nostri animali. Noi non siamo terroristi. Noi non siamo animali. Ma ci trattano come se lo fossimo. Non abbiamo altro che i nostri piedi qui. Un paio di scarpe buone può salvarti la vita. Ma siamo sempre di più. Sempre di più. Di più, di più. A gennaio abbiamo fatto uno sciopero della fame di 4 giorni, ma non è servito a niente. Qui ci sono persone malate, non abbiamo neanche un medico e un bagno solo ogni 100 persone. Non ci permettono di raggiungere le città, ma non abbiamo neanche le condizioni per restare. Noi restiamo lo stesso e periodicamente proviamo a varcare il confine. Non abbiamo alternativa.
It was very inspiring listening to Professor Morcane and to his ideas. It was very inspiring also watching your performance. It was amazing as always. Thank you guys. Thank you Marina, thank you Patrick, thank you Lorenzo, and thank you Nunzia. We will be talking in a very few seconds with Professor Guido Giordano on Università of Roma 3. We will be talking about the importance of water and the importance of sea.
And we're gonna talk about the issue of Dead Sea and the war impact on environment.
Let's listen to Professor Guido Giordano. Enjoy.
Water is the most amazing element that exists on our planet. It's the reason for life. When magma erupts, there is a lot of water which is stored inside the earth, which is able to come out. This water over time form the atmosphere. And what we call water cycle is the injection of this water budget into the atmosphere, which then is able to condense because it starts as a hot vapor, and then it rises up, it condenses, and it forms the clouds. And then eventually these clouds are able to even form droplets of water that then rain back onto the Earth's surface, and part of those would flow on the Earth's surface, and we see them as streams and rivers. But another part of that water actually infiltrates into the rocks and then percolates into the rocks, forming aquifers, which then flow like, let's say, underground rivers. They are not rivers, but they flow also then towards the sea, towards the rivers, towards the springs. And then because we are in this fortunate situation in the solar system, having a star which is at the right distance to provide the right energy budget for life to exist, this heat warms up the water of the rivers, of the lakes, and of the sea, which then evaporates and then goes back into the atmosphere again, and then it condensates, and then it rains back. And this is the water cycle. Well, everything that is a cycle is conceptually very helpful, because you know that is renewable. Once the water molecules are in the atmosphere, the beauty is that they can actually circulate and therefore feed and allow all type of physical and biological processes that occur into the atmosphere. We live into the atmosphere. We need the oxygen. We need the water vapor into this. And at the same time, we need to drink water. And at the same time, we need to eat. And this water is dispersed everywhere in the life cycle. We are made of water, and whether we are vegetarians or we are carnivores, whatever is our diet, we need water, use that water. So the cyclicity that I've described before is essential for life to exist, because it allows the renewability of water availability to the surface and to all those biological processes. The problem with the Dead Sea is a very delicate environment on Earth. It's the deepest depression on the surface of the Earth. That particular location, as you know, is the site of an ongoing conflict among Israelis and Jordanians and Palestinians, and part of this conflict is not only based on cultural, religious, or economic reason, but is about resources. So the water resources in that dry environment is very important. So who controls the water is in a dominant position, and the victim of this is the Dead Sea, because the water is diverted from the streams, from the rivers, to other purposes, not only because it's needed, but to demonstrate the power. So it's a conflict on water. Then the Dead Sea is dying because there is less water that arrives in this very hot environment, and evaporation increases, and the salinity of the Dead Sea is increasing, and all the ecosystem that is in this location is changing so fast that cannot cope, and there is a risk for the Dead Sea to die effectively. Almost everywhere on Earth, there is almost only one type of economic and socio-political organization that we call capitalism here, or liberalism. And this involves a race to conquer more resources, which many times, when the resources are restricted, are not unlimited like on Earth, they become real conflicts. Entire population, for example, along the coast of Africa, that do not find anymore their the fishery that they need to survive, because there are big companies that have big ships that feed more developed societies with their food needs, and they basically deplete completely the resources of the sea, and this then induces migrations, for example, and in some cases local conflicts. So there is a very strong relationship between how humans approach the how resources are sought and the development of conflicts on Earth. In a way, it's one ingredient of the solution. It's not the solution. The topic is more complex because, as we were saying before, the interrelationship between human and physical processes is very complex, and I personally think that we do not simply need to go for renewable energies, but we have to renew our approach to economy and to social relationships, because it's the predatory approach to resources that makes the problem. We may resolve one thing, but we may just shift the problem to another issue, which may be even worse than what we were facing before if we do not change our attitude to let's say, to life in a simple way. But we also need to take into account why we do this. If we do this for maintaining a predatory approach of increasing the richness of a very little minority of the humanity, and leaving the rest as it is, this is not going to be good. It's not the point. The climate crisis is not a subject that can be delegated to technicians, whoever they are, because what we need to solve it is a much more profound crisis, which is in our minds, how we think that our livelihood should be supported, sustained. I think so, because I have seen, even looking at the history of, from my point of view, of science, we've had a period where everything was, let's say, progressive. We could do anything, and engineering. It looked like that the humans were able to really go wherever, in the moon, in the space, increase the production forever. These peoples that at the end of the 60s and the early 70s started to say there is a limit. We cannot, run this rush. Take into account that we are on a limited Earth. Don't want to go back to the to pre-industrial era, but there is a way in between. So that's not just this or the primitive time. There is something in between that we can find, but we need the concourse, and we need to ask, we need to interrogate, we need to listen, everyone, again, not just the technicians, because the technicians simply resolve what other people tell them to resolve.
Fa caldo oggi. Una volta passavamo le ore davanti al fiume, a vedere gli animali che si abbeveravano davanti alla riva del fiume. Passavamo le giornate così. Ad oggi, gli unici animali che si vedono sono gli avvoltoi che aspettano. Una volta la terra veniva coltivata per 3 mesi e altri 3 mesi si raccoglievano i frutti e 6 mesi si aspettava. Però in questi giorni niente. Non piove da mesi. Siamo ore e ore fermi ad aspettare che cambia qualcosa, ma nulla. Alla TV danno notizie di diluvi nei paesi vicini, ma noi non capiamo. Stiamo qui, fermi, a morire sotto questo sole.
It is amazing to discover how many links there are between our way of life, our way of thinking the planet, and our relationship to the planet and what's happening to it, what's happening to climate and the climate emergency. And we'll be also thinking about our way of thinking our cities, and we'll be doing it with Professor Maurizio Carta.
We're gonna discuss the current urban paradigm and the way how urban design is responsible of reducing of climate change effects.
So let's enjoy all together our interview to Professor Maurizio Carta, Università degli Studi di Palermo, and to one more little performance by Raizes Teatro.
Enjoy.
I think that we are not in the Anthropocene. We are in the Anthropocalypse, because we live in a through apocalypse produced by the human activity. The sense of to be entered in a fabulous age, but this age reveals itself an apocalypse. When we reshape the planet using 2 parameters, the ecological footprint and the loss of cultural identity, this is our planet. But the Anthropocene produces also a social, human, cultural injustice. We must have the consciousness that the Anthropocene is not only a pandemic, it's a syndemic. This is the Anthropocalypse, the problem of land grabbing, the industrial use of the landscape, the huge urbanization, the conflict between the city of richness and poverty, the effect of the climate change on the flooding of the city, this is New York or Venice, and now the coronavirus is the effect of our huge expansion of cities, of settlement, of industrial activity. The only effective way to go away from the apocalypse is to rethink our urban model. The first is to reshape the habitat, reshape the way where we live, the way of our production, because our production is based on the previous development model. And the second, how is possible to plan and design cities able to be resilient? We must redefine cities able to reduce the causes, but also in the short time able to react in a creative way, not only in an effective way, able to react to the crisis, to the effect of the crisis. The most important role I remember a UNESCO report of 2015 titled Reshaping Cultural Policies. It's the first report by UNESCO that in a clear way affirms that cultural policies could be the most important tools to achieve the 17 United Nations goals for the actual millennium. Cultural policies could be the activator of integrated solution, not only a multi-layer approach. This is our goal. In order to achieve the climate neutrality in 2050, we have to make several challenges in the field of power, of course, in the field of road transport, in the field of air and sea transport, in the field of industry, in the field of buildings, in the field of waste, in the field of agriculture. What is the tools able to achieve this objective? I think the cultural approach that made a revolution of culture, because we had to redefine our building, our mobility. This is a cultural revolution indeed. I call the city of the future augmented city. In order to explain the importance of the city to be an enabled device, not only an habitat, in order to reduce inequality, in order to improve the empowerment of the humanity, of the community. But how is possible that our city act as a social justice improvement? I remember one of the most interesting plants in the planet, the mangrove. Because the mangrove are, for me, the perfect metaphor of the augmented city. Because the mangrove are the hybrid plants, able to live in the interface between the sea and the river. They are aerial plants, but also submarine. The city as a mangrove, the mangrove city, is able to cross several layers, several scale, and several meaning of the city. They cross the landscape level and the city level, the infrastructure field and the district field. They combine social innovation and the role of makers. And also, on the right side, they cross through the anthropic, natural, domestic, relational, productive, and creative field, able to intercept the different meaning of social injustice, not only the traditional meaning, because we have several scale and several meaning of social injustice, not only in the field of traditional studies about the injustice, because we have the injustice of the nature, the injustice of the different relation between different kind of domestic rights, or in the field of the production, the field of the jobs. There is a huge injustice between people, and we have to reconnect several fields, several layers, in order to improve, to guarantee a social justice, a true right to the city, according to Henri Lefebvre. Yes, I call this neo-cosmopolitan habitat, because we have to rescue the true meaning of cosmopolitanism, that not only regards the relation among humans, but the relation among the several inhabitants of the planet, human and plants, human and human, local people and global relation. And the plants and the animals are one of the most important cosmopolitan keeper, able to extend our humanity and connect the humanity to the global network of the planet. James Lovelock in 1972 invented the term Gaia hypothesis to define the planet. And what is the true meaning of the Gaia hypothesis? The planet Earth is a perfect relation, is a perfect alliance, is a sort of brothership between different kind of species. There is a demonstration of that, yes, in the coral reef. The coral reef in the Pacific Ocean is the perfect example of the coexistence, of the active coexistence among several kinds of species in a circular relation. This alliance, the alliance between human and other species, had to rescue a circular alliance, not only a linear alliance. Is not a synthesis rational interests, but is an alliance of emotional interests, living interests. I think this is the point. And for me, this is the meaning of neocosmopolitanism.
Lo sole è già spuntato in cielo mare e voi, bedduzza mia, dormite ancora. La cedri sono stanchi di cantare e affreddate e ti aspettano qua fora. Sopra lo varco negro so posati e aspettano quando che va affacciati.
Che cosa faccio di questa terra mia?
È vuota assai.
È vuota assai.
Che cosa faccio di questa terra mia?
È vuota assai.
È vuota assai.
Distese interminabili,
Di terra vergine.
Abbandonata.
disabitata,
Improduttiva.
Libera.
ruspe,
Cemento.
Pilastri.
Ferro.
Vetro.
plastica.
Nascono palazzi.
Grattacieli.
Quartieri.
Dove siamo?
In Africa.
Chi costruisce?
L'architetto è asiatico.
Le case sono già state comprate.
No.
Saranno comprate?
Mai.
La terra?
Era improduttiva.
Libera.
Costruiscono interi paesi.
Città moderne. Città.
Chi?
Imprese dall'Oriente.
Dalla Cina.
Dove?
In Africa.
Costruiscono in Africa.
In Africa c'è una città fantasma. Kalimba. È silenziosa. È immacolata come la Madonna. Luccica. Brilla. Profuma di nuovo. Quando cammini senti l'eco dei tuoi passi sull'asfalto lucido. Kalimba è addormentata. Come un cimitero. Con tombe alte più di 200 metri che grattano il cielo. È arrivata così, di soppiatto. L'hanno portata impacchettata dalla Cina. Ed improvviso era lì, maestosa, con le sue scuole, i suoi efficienti impianti di aria condizionata, i suoi viali squadrati. Padone andava tanto fiero mentre aiutava a costruirla. Era orgoglioso del suo dollaro del giorno. Era esausto nella sua casetta di lamiera. Eppure guardala oggi. E là? C'è nessuno? E là? Nessuno. Si sono presi il nostro petrolio
E in cambio ci hanno lasciato una città fantasma. C'è nessuno! C'è nessuno! Un affitto di una casa costa 30 volte del salario medio di un angolano. Eppure non... C'è nessuno! Solo la terra morta, sepolta sotto tonnellate di cemento, sotto un mausoleo rivestito.
It was a great pleasure to be with you all tonight, to listen to all these experts and to think about climate justice. We have to act, we have to change our minds, and we have to fix this problem. We have to make the planet be free again.
Thank you for staying with us, and let's meditate about all these interesting topics that we've been discovering during this journey.
If you want to reach out, just let's check our website, Human Freedom 2021, and our Facebook page, Human Freedom 2021.
And see you soon with the next campaign.
See you soon.